What type of fantasy do you like? Do you know what my fantasy is?
Inside the 30. Swung on, there she goes. Shot tip. Oh, what a stop.
The Hardcore Fantasy Show with Dave Golikoff is about to begin. Are you ready?
Welcome to the Hardcore Fantasy Show. I'm your host for this week, Corey Erdman. Dave Golikoff off in Syracuse, enjoying some college basketball. Seems to take a lot of vacations these days.
He's a high-profile guy. He's got a lot of high-profile events to attend.
He is. He didn't go to the Royal Rumble, though, which the Royal Rumble pool, Corey and Sackville won it. Your DVDs are on their way. So today we're going to be talking fantasy NASCAR with the Daytona 500, the Great American Race. We have David Reagan in the second half, and also J.R. Fitzpatrick, the Canadian phenom who finished fourth in the Truck Series race last night. I'm out of breath here. I don't know. I was struggling with this chair. We got some technical issues with the chair. Headphones are wrapped around them. So NASCAR in the second half, we're going to break that down, get you prepared, and we're also going to be talking to Ryan Rance from OneBadWheel.com, one of the foremost fantasy NASCAR resources on the web. I'm going to talk to him in a couple minutes, but first, let's get started with the fantasy foreplay. Let's kick it off in Washington, and congratulations to the Nationals. You have finally signed a free agent. It's not Mark Teixeira, but he costs about $80 million less, and he may actually hit more home runs than him as well. Of course, I'm talking about Adam Dunn. There's quite a stigma amongst fantasy circles regarding Dunn, and it all stems from his poor average and his high strikeout numbers. But, I mean, this guy will pretty much swing at a hot dog vendor in the bleachers if it's in his line of sight while he's at the plate. And we're not talking about Randall Simon either. But let's remember, this isn't the early 2000s, and that's when home runs were a cheap commodity. And what Dunn does do, that's a mouthful, is put balls into those bleachers. In fact, only one guy, Ryan Howard, did it better than him last season. And, there's only 240 home run hitters in all of baseball last year, believe it or not. Some people are concerned that his power numbers may go down playing in RFK Stadium, a notorious pitcher's park, but let's remember that this guy has hit balls out of the Great American Ballpark. This guy could hit 40 home runs dead center at the Polo Grounds, probably. So with his value probably pretty low in fantasy pools, don't shy away from taking him in the middle rounds of your Roto League, because it's not that often that you can find guys that hit home runs for cheap anymore. Moving over to Anaheim, another guy that people are down on after being overshadowed for a couple years in a star-studded Yankees lineup is Bobby Abreu. And this is something I can't understand, because Abreu has been one of the most consistent all-around players in the majors over the past decade. Take a look at a worst-case scenario for him. This is using his worst numbers in each category over the past 10 seasons. 152 games played, 546 at-bats, 98 runs, 35 doubles, 15 home runs, 79 RBIs, 22 stolen bases, and 73 walks. Would you be disappointed with those numbers on your team? I mean, give me a break.
And he gets to replace Garrett Anderson in the lineup there.
You're correct, yes. He's always healthy. He produces in every category. The only downfall is that Mike Scioscia loves to play a little bit of small ball, so he might not approach his numbers from his Philly days, but you can't be upset with having that in your Roto lineup at all. And lastly, you might want to hold off on drafting Miguel Tejada for the time being. The latest report is that he's in danger of being departed in the wake of the lying to Congress controversy. And remember, he's been in hot water before for falsifying his birth certificate, so keep an eye on that situation.
I think he's going to get deported, not departed.
Deported.
I think departed means he's 6 feet under.
Sorry, I had a Leo DiCaprio marathon last night. Moving to the NBA, overshadowing the always exciting celebrity and rookie games in Phoenix is a trade involving a former Sun. As speculated for quite some time, the Toronto Raptors sent Jermaine O'Neal and Jamario Moon to the Miami Heat in exchange for Sean Marion and Marcus Banks. The Raptors' problems were twofold. You have Jay Triano running a fast-paced offense with pretty much a slow team whose team's two tangible assets were power forwards. And secondly, when they weren't able to push the ball up court and had to slow it down, they had two guys in the paint who have the same skills and like to take the ball in the same area, and no shooters to make other teams respect them. From a fantasy perspective, it was basically like having two running backs sharing carries in the NFL. The Raptors will be the big fantasy beneficiary of this deal. Marion will give him the ability to speed up the offense because he can shoot off the dribble, and in addition, he makes people respect the post game. And with O'Neal gone, Bosch gets all the touches down low, and Marcus Banks, they get the change of pace point guard that they lost in T.J. Ford. For the Heat, the jury is still out on how O'Neal will fit in. Who knows if a rebuilding franchise like Miami is going to axe Michael Beasley's minutes significantly, but more importantly, who knows if he can stay healthy. Nonetheless, good news for owners of Bosch and Marion. And lastly, the second and third notes both come from Golden State, where a pair of veterans are heating up, to say the least. The first is Ronny Turioff, who is seeing a spike in his playing time as of late and has been putting up some great all-around numbers over the past 3 games. 12.3 points per game, 63.6 field goal percentage. He's just not missing. 8 rebounds in his last game as well. He's a very good energy guy, as everyone knows, and good for leagues with lots of categories. But even better than him has been Steven Jackson, who has taken a break from punching fans, swigging Belvedere vodka, and getting into legal trouble, and has quietly put together 27 points per game and a 46.2 field goal percentage over the past 6 games. So go out and pick those guys up. Let's wrap up the fantasy foreplay here, and let's get into some fantasy NASCAR, because the season kicks off tomorrow night. The nationwide race, I guess, is going on in a couple minutes, but the Daytona 500 tomorrow night. So with that being said, we bring in a man from OneBadWheel.com with the appropriately named blog Ryan's Rants. Ryan Rants joins us. Ryan, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. I guess no time for you guys to warm up. The first week of the season is obviously the busiest for you guys at One Bad Wheel. What's it been like? Has it been pretty hectic over there?
Well, for me, it's, I just write my blog and, do my power rankings, but it's a bit business and, traffic has really picked up lately, so. And the season's coming up, so it's going to be a big time. I can imagine. The first question isn't exactly fantasy-related, but one of the hot topics around NASCAR has been the economy and the effect on NASCAR. Watching qualifying and the Budweiser shootout a couple days ago, you see a lot of drivers that are owners/drivers that have basically constructed their own teams and assembled their own teams. How is that going to affect certain drivers? And specifically Tony Stewart is going to be my first question, because he's coming obviously from some big name teams. He's raced for the biggest owners in NASCAR for quite some time. How is he going to fare? Does he have the funds to put together a season that will result in him winding up in the chase? Tony Stewart will have no problems this year, I believe. Last year, at the Richmond race, right before the chase cut off, Tony Stewart was racing Jimmy Johnson, 1-2. And at the end of the race, when Jimmy Johnson won, he let it slip out that next year that him and Tony Stewart are going to be teammates, why Tony Stewart wouldn't rough him up. Tony Stewart will be fine because he's got half ownership with Stewart Haas Racing now, and he has no financial investment involved with it. It's just Gene Haas money, and Gene Haas is a billionaire, and Tony Stewart's just the name brand behind it. And they're heavily partnered with Rick Hendrick Racing, which is the top team in NASCAR right now.
Speaking of Hendrick Racing, Ryan, what's going to happen with, you got all the top guys, 4 guys in one stable. Is there going to be enough wins, and what's going to happen late in races as these guys are battling it out?
Well, with Hendrick Racing, they're the superpower team in NASCAR, but there's 36 races, so there's enough to go around. Lots of the drivers at Rick Hendrick aren't really big winner drivers, during the course of the year, like Dale Jr. and Mark Martin. They're not the big winners, but Jimmy Johnson will have a big year, and I believe there's enough races to go around for each of them to have their shot.
Now, I wanted to ask you about Stewart's incumbent. Obviously, there hasn't been this much hype about a rookie in quite some time, Joey Logano, and obviously it has a lot to do with his age. I think, what, is he 19 years old, 20 years old?
He's 18 right now.
He's 18 right now. Yeah. There you go. And already in the big Home Depot campaigns and whatnot, lots of hype. What do you see out of him? I see a lot of people looking at him, and we'll get into what fantasy NASCAR is later on, but a lot of people drafting him high in their pools. Is that something you would be looking at, or are you a little bit skeptical, and would you wait to see exactly how he fares with all this hoopla being only 18 years old?
Well, I personally have Joey Logano on my own team, but first thing with Fantasy NASCAR, when you draft a team, you want to make sure you fill it out with safe picks, and then, do like one of the wild card picks. I believe Joey Logano is going to be a good driver this year. I think he'll have a top 20 season in the points, because there's lots of drivers who really aren't that good, seriously, and Joey Logano will be good. Because Jimmy Johnson, in his pre-rookie year in 2001, he had 3 starts and had the average of finish 31st. And people are basing a lot of the Joey Logano downplay on how he performed last year when he was in the Nextel Cup car, and he wasn't very good at all. His average finish was 37th. But the main problem with Joe Gibbs Racing with Joey Logano right now is that with Greg Zipadelli, they're basically giving him Tony Stewart cars right now when they should be giving him Joey Logano cars. Bobby Labonte also had that problem too during his later days when he was at Joe Gibbs Racing. They basically gave Bobby Labonte Tony Stewart cars also, so that led to the downfall of Bobby Labonte. So what they really need to focus on is giving Joey Logano cars.
And let's hope that they do, and he can capitalize on his potential. But let's back it up and talk about fantasy NASCAR in general, because this is something we're foraying into pretty much for the first time here on our show. And I'm sure a lot of listeners out there don't really know anything about fantasy NASCAR. It seems to me that it's a new fad. Tell us about fantasy NASCAR, how long you've been involved with it, and maybe some of the different formats that people can choose to take part in.
Well, I started fantasy racing back in high school. It's kind of a funny story what happened, but I won't share about it. But I've been doing fantasy racing for 8 years now. There's all different types of formats that require different disciplines of play. Perhaps my main play of fantasy racing is at OneBadWheel.com, where there's 3 free fantasy games this year. There's Champs, Chumps, Sleepers, there's Big 18, and then there's Head-to-Head. Each of the games has a different discipline. For example, in the Champs, Chumps, Sleepers game, you pick 2 drivers to do good, who are kind of, 12th through, 24th, and then you pick sleepers, who are, 24th through, 36th, and then you pick chumps, which are drivers who are in the chase currently at the time, and you want the chumps, to do bad, so you want, like a Josh Gordon or Jimmy Johnson to want to crash, which that's the discipline of that game. And Big 18 is a game where it's the top 18 drivers from last year in owner points, and you're allowed to use each one of the drivers twice during the course of the year. The head-to-head is when you're given lineup of 10 different NASCAR drivers, and they're head-to-head. You have to pick which driver is going to do better between the 2.
Sounds like a lot going on there, Ryan, but with the fantasy NASCAR, a lot of the guys here, even the amateurs in our fantasy NASCAR world, know the Kyle Bushes, the Johnsons, the Edwards, the Gordons, the Earnhardts. Help us out with a couple sleepers here. I got my eye on, guys like Brian Vickers, and maybe being able to take it into the next level this year. Who do you think?
Well, a little comment on Brian Vickers is that I unfortunately experienced a lot of him last year when he was on my fantasy team, and he didn't really do very good to end up the year. I think his average finish during the chase was something like 28th, and that's not really anything that you can really build a very good season upon. But I really like guys like Jamie McMurray to have a good season. He's really confident right now. He's in a good car. He was hot towards the end of the last season. He's got back his crew chief that he had during his time at Chip Ganassi, so he feels really good about his relationship now and going forward with the season.
I'm checking out your compadre Jeff Gutowski's blog at OneBadWheel.com, looking at the Group C drivers as we're talking about sleepers. Eric Almirola, that's a name I really haven't seen before. What can you tell us about him? I've seen him on some different fantasy previews and whatnot as a name that you're supposed to be looking out for. What can you tell us about him, and is he a good play today, or tomorrow, I suppose, at Daytona?
Well, Eric Almirola is driving for... his team changed their names last year. Chip Ganassi merged along with Teresa Earnhardt for their team. But Eric Almirola, he drove part-time last year, sharing rides with Mark Martin, so now he's on his own. But Eric Almirola, he'll be a decent driver. I wouldn't, base a team upon him, but in certain formats, like in the Yahoo.com game, I don't really play that game the most, but he would probably be a good pick for that type of grouping. The Yahoo League.
And what do you think about guys like A.J. Allmendinger?
Well, I like A.J. Allmendinger a lot. I think he's a really talented driver. I just think that he has lots of bad circumstances happen to him. Lots of people got down on him last year when he started missing some races early, but then his Team Red Bull put in veteran Mike Skinner into their car, and he wasn't able to do any better. But towards the end of the last year, Allmendinger is consistently running in the top 15.
Yeah, I had him last year when they kicked him out of the Red Bull car, and I couldn't replace him. It was really frustrating, but enough with the lower tier guys. What are we thinking about Mark Martin, the veteran of the circuit here? You mentioned he's not there for wins I mean, he's just there to compile the points. But what can we expect from him?
My man, Mark Martin. I'll put that in. I'm a Mark Martin fan.
Well, I like Mark Martin too, but I think people are really playing with their heart on that one. I'm sorry to say it, but people really play with their heart with Mark Martin. I think people are really basing Mark Martin having a really good season or winning the Daytona 500, especially based on what he did 2 years in the Daytona 500 when Kevin Harvick won. But there was a lot of things that happened that day that people are really forgetting about when they evaluate Mark Martin for the Daytona 500, because lots of guys had a better car than Mark Martin. He was just there at the end. Some guys like Tony Stewart led 25% of the laps that year. Kurt Busch led about 25% of the laps too, and then both of them wiped out, and then the whole story changed that year. Then everyone had a fair shot.
What do you think about Matt Kenseth tomorrow afternoon? Looking at his stats yesterday, just on the Nationwide Tour, I think he has something like 29 top 10s at Daytona in the Nationwide Tour, so it's obviously a guy who knows how to get stuff done. Do you think he's capable of winning, though, or is he still in that funk of just racing for driver's points? Is he someone that we want to put on our team? And I get looking at betting lines as well. He's at about plus 2,000, and this is a guy who's won there before and obviously has some success. Is he a good play for tomorrow night?
Well, Matt Kenseth, he's a kind of interesting driver, but I don't think he's really that good of a play for Daytona, for probably the type of groupings for whatever type of system you're playing. There's better picks like Kyle Busch out there. There's Earnhardt out there. There's Jeff Gordon, Jimmy Johnson. There's lots of different better picks, but Matt Kenseth's a good driver who you want to base your season around if you're in a season-long game, because Matt Kenseth excels on the intermediate tracks, and other drivers aren't quite as good as Matt Kenseth at the intermediates, which is where the season championships are usually won and lost at.
Now, on the other end of the spectrum, a name that you just mentioned, Kyle Busch, a guy that basically goes for broke every single race. What he did last season, is that something you think he can replicate? Obviously, racking up that amount of wins. He tailed off towards the chase, albeit because of some mechanical problems and some wrecks. Is that the kind of driver that he is? I mean, can you really expect X amount of wins out of him, or is it sort of hit and miss because of his reckless style?
Well, Kyle Busch is a really talented driver, but last year was the first year that he won more than 2 races in his career in Cup racing. But I expect him to have a good season. And he's also my favorite for winning the Daytona 500. Kyle Busch, last year, he started really maturing as a driver. He improved on the intermediate tracks, which is where the championships are won. He won both the road courses last year. He scored the most points at the restrictor plate tracks. But Kyle Busch, he'll have a good season this next year. And I would probably say that you can probably peg him in for about 5 wins, I'm sure.
And what about my personal favorite driver of mine, Denny Hamlin?
Denny Hamlin, I would probably rate him as almost like a second-tier guy who makes a chase, because Denny Hamlin, he needs to improve on his team, because his team, they usually have good performances to start out the season, but then about halfway through the regular season, then their performances drop off. But Denny Hamlin, his main thing he needs to improve on for 2009 is he needs to improve on the intermediate tracks, which are very important.
Yeah, let's go back to some sleepers, because obviously, as I said, we're newbies around here to Fantasy NASCAR, and we probably need some help picking some guys to round out our roster, especially if we're going to be playing a salary cap game, and I think we started one up on Yahoo.com. What do you think about a guy like a veteran like Michael Waltrip, a guy who has plenty of experience at Daytona, plenty of restrictor plate racing experience? Do you think that he can turn in, even a top 15 at this track, given his experience and what he's done in the past?
Well, Daytona is a track that strange things happen there. Daytona usually writes its own storyline, but Michael Waltrip does have 2 wins there in the Daytona 500. Michael Waltrip, maybe he has he has a chance there, but it will depend upon attrition. I wouldn't really base too much on Michael Waltrip, but depending what type of salary cap situation you're in, he's probably a better pick than lots of the other guys in that grouping.
Now, you mentioned that Daytona is a weird track, and that's something that maybe we don't know very much about. What can you tell us about Daytona as a track, in terms of its structure, and what kind of drivers it favors? And what can you tell us about restrictor plates, because that's something that's new to the Sprint Cup. Who does that favor, and what does that do to a car and to a racer and their approach to the race?
Well, restrictor plates in NASCAR are made to slow down the cars, because before they used to go too fast, and then when they would go too fast, there would be tremendous accidents that would happen, and they were afraid that some drivers would get seriously injured. I believe Rusty Wallace one time flipped about 27 times over with his car. Daytona is a track that's basically built for handling. if your car can handle that Daytona, you can stay on the gas, and you basically have a horsepower advantage over your competitors if you can stay on the gas. So it's really about handling. It's an old track, hasn't been repaved since 1978, I believe. And Dale Jr. jokingly said that perhaps maybe Daytona would be repaved by the time he retired, but it's a really, really rough track, Daytona. It's a 2.5-mile track.
It was amazing watching the race in high def yesterday, and you don't really get a feel for how difficult it is to handle a NASCAR until you really watch it in HD or up close. But the cars are just shaking. You know, when you're watching from the aerial view, you really think that these guys are just coasting around and around, but they're really not. Ryan, before we let you go, give us your starting lineup in whatever format you're playing in. Maybe your top four. Give us your starting lineup for tomorrow night.
Well, I play in too many leagues almost now, but my Daytona top five right now is I have Kyle Busch winning, Jimmy Johnson second, David Reagan third, Earnhardt fourth, and my number 5 pick, which is some late-breaking fantasy news, is that Tony Stewart is going to a backup car along with Ryan Newman, the happy hour wreck.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yes.
Wow, all right. Well, you mentioned David Reagan, and we have him on the in the second half as well. We're going to be talking to him about the 500. Ryan Rance, thank you very much, and everyone check out onebadwheel.com. It very much is the best fantasy NASCAR resource out there on the web. Ryan, thanks for joining us.
Yep, no problem.
Take care now.
Thank you.
Now, Geoff, I guess we're getting revved up for our Yahoo Fantasy League. Who do you have starting here?
Well, yeah, just to give a shout out to the league for all our listeners out there. If you are a member of Yahoo, it's pretty simple. You go into the Fantasy Auto Racing. We're a private league, group ID number 27132. Password is hardcore. But it's not, sorry, you'd mentioned it's a salary cap league. It's actually a tier league.
Oh, okay. Oh, so Group A, Group B, Group C.
You pick one A driver, 2 B drivers, and 1 C driver.
Oh, okay.
And you get their points.
Okay.
And you set a new lineup every week, and it's a blast. We haven't been running long, but we've already got close to 30 guys, and knowing us, we probably got some hardcore swag, no pun intended, to the winner.
Well, we're gonna hope for that anyway. So I'll give you my picks right here. Here we go. We're gonna give you Carl Edwards. I think he might take the checkered flag. It's just a guy that races hard every single week. For my tier B drivers, I will have David Reagan, and not just because we have him in the second half. There's my cheap plug. I will give you Clint Boyer because he ran very well in the Truck Series, and Michael Waltrip, given his experience at Daytona for my C driver. What do you think?
I got Gordon as my A. Not the biggest Gordon fan, but I saw, how he ran at the duel. I saw him go from 24th to 4th in literally 3 laps. So he's my A. And I haven't decided on the rest of the roster, so I'll figure that out this afternoon.
Well, nonetheless, as I said, we're talking to David Reagan on the other side of the break. We also have J.R. Fitzpatrick, the Canadian NASCAR phenom, who finished 4th in the Camping World Truck Series last night. So you're listening to the Hardcore Fantasy Show, NASCAR edition, on Sirius Channel 98.
Let's ride around the city, make love in the car. Let's get on the expressway, let me tease you, ma. And while you drive, baby, I wanna taste your tongue. Pull in the rest here.